the morning I signed the divorce papers. Grant Whitcomb told me Bryn Caldwell was 7 weeks pregnant before Elise Danner had capped the pen. We were in Elise's office, downtown Providence, across a walnut table that reflected my hands clearly. Grant kept his eyes on the agreement and offered, "My family will be at the clinic this afternoon," like he was confirming lunch. I looked at the blue ink under my name and understood he had saved that sentence for the moment he believed I had no clean place left for my pain. The room smelled like stale coffee, printer heat, and expensive furniture bought to make ugly conversations look civilized. Elise stayed quiet beside me, her folder closed, because she already knew what Grant did not know yet. The charcoal suit he wore was familiar, one I had steamed before fundraisers, where he smiled beside women who mistook calm for character. I did not ask if Bryn knew, because Bryn had known about me long before she learned to soften her voice around my name. I signed the final page because there was nothing inside that marriage left to negotiate. 11 years of dinners, tax forms, holiday cards, donor events, and photographs where I stood behind him had become initials in blue ink. Grant watched my hand as if he expected it to tremble, then lowered his voice and said, "I thought you should hear it from me." I slid the pen back toward Elise and answered, "No. Grant, you wanted to hear yourself say it first." Outside, Providence looked too ordinary for a morning that had split my life. Wet pavement shone under gray lights. People carried paper cups into buildings, and nobody knew I had 2 suitcases in my trunk. I did not drive back to the house, because Willa Stanton was already in Burlington with a spare key, and Elise had warned me not to answer calls or donate 1 sentence to Grant's version of me. I turned my phone face down, pulled onto the highway, and left him with the family he had chosen before they learned what Bryn's appointment would cost them. By the time I crossed into Massachusetts, I was thinking about the first family room Celeste Whitcomb ever made me stand outside of. It was not a literal room at first, just a circle of voices that lowered when I came near. A dinner table where my seat seemed added after everyone else had been placed. Providence old money did not slam doors. It smiled with dry lips, moved a name card 6 inches away, and let you understand you had been allowed inside but never welcomed. Celeste never called me unsuitable, because women like her trusted manners to do the cutting. She called me capable, practical, impressive with details, words that sounded generous until I noticed they were never used for women she considered family. At the last scholarship luncheon, she touched my elbow near the coat check and murmured, "Lena, you understand the work better than anyone, but tonight Grant needs a softer face beside him." Across the room, Bryn Caldwell stood near the donor table, laughing with Grant as if she had been invited into the life I maintained. That night, I watched Bryn shake hands with 3 women whose names were printed on plaques in our building. Grant introduced her as the communications mind, helping him bring the program into its next season. Though I had written the report and fixed the budget, he had forgotten to read. My name tag was 2 tables away, beside a retired dentist who asked whether I was new. Celeste lifted her glass when Grant finished speaking, and Bryn leaned into the applause like it belonged to her. I did not make a scene then, because the evidence was not dramatic enough for anyone determined to misunderstand it. It was a wrong chair, a wrong introduction, a speech wearing my labor in his voice, and a woman learning the shape of my place before my marriage had officially ended. By the time Grant told me about the clinic, I already knew his family had saved a room for someone else. They did not know the floor under that room had started to crack. The receipts did not look angry when I found them. They looked ordinary, which made them worse, because ordinary things are what people trust until the numbers stop behaving. A hotel invoice marked as community outreach had dates that matched no workshop, no donor visit, no student event, and no reason for Grant to be anywhere near that coastline. I sat at the kitchen table in Providence with my laptop open and understood that the lie had not been hidden in passion, but in reimbursement codes. I was not a forensic accountant, and I never pretended to be one. I ran the scholarship program, which meant I knew the smell of a real invoice, the rhythm of a valid vendor email, and the difference between a late report and a story dressed as paperwork. Bryn's name appeared first as a communications consultant, then as a strategy partner, then as a brand advisor with no deliverables attached to the payments. Grant had approved each one with the same relaxed signature he used on birthday cards and donor thank you notes. The deeper I looked, the quieter my house became around me. There were hotel confirmations sent to Grant's private email, travel charges buried under event planning, and one campaign draft Bryn had mistakenly sent to the program inbox before recalling it too late. The subject line praised Grant's new public direction, but the attachment carried language I had written months earlier for women who needed second chances, not for a man buying himself a cleaner image. I printed that page, placed it beside the hotel invoice, and felt something inside me go still. When I brought the folder to Elise Danner, she read for almost 20 minutes before she touched her glasses. "Do not turn this into a post," she said, sliding one page back toward me. "Send it where people have the authority to ask questions you cannot." So I followed instructions, not impulses, and documented what I knew without adding heat to it. The Rhode Island Attorney General's Charitable Oversight Office received the records tied to the nonprofit funds, and the tax issues went where Elise said they belonged. For months, I copied only what I had lawful access to and left everything else alone. I did not need Grant's phone, Bryn's messages, or Celeste's whispered approval over tea. I had contracts without work, trips without programs, signatures without explanations, and a husband who had confused my silence with blindness. By the time I signed the divorce papers, the receipts had already said what I never had to scream. While I was unlocking Willa Stanton's apartment in Burlington, 7 people were settling into a private clinic waiting room in Boston to celebrate a future built on the wrong date. Grant had brought Bryn Caldwell there like proof, and Celeste Whitcomb had arrived in pearls with 2 cousins, one retired board friend, and enough quiet approval to make the room feel arranged before Bryn sat down. They were not waiting for a baby as much as they were waiting for a corrected version of Grant's life. One where I became the woman everyone mentioned softly and then stopped mentioning at all. Willa set one box beside the door and murmured, "You do not have to look." But my old phone had already lit up on the counter. The message came from someone who worked in that medical building and knew Willa well enough to be careful. It did not sound dramatic, just plain enough to hurt, saying they had all walked in together. I pictured Celeste smoothing her skirt, Bryn touching her stomach, Grant sitting close enough to look devoted if anyone recognized him. My hands were still dusty from the moving box, and the apartment around me felt too empty for what was happening 2 states away. Later, I learned the doctor had stayed calm from the first question. She asked Bryn for the date of her last period, waited while Bryn gave the answer she had rehearsed, then looked back at the screen long enough for the room to notice. Grant asked, "Is something wrong?" And Bryn answered too quickly, "No, everything's fine," before the doctor had said anything that belonged to her. Then the doctor explained that the pregnancy measured further along than 7 weeks, far enough that Grant could not make the timeline fit without moving himself into a week where he had not been with Bryn. Celeste asked if measurements could be off, and the doctor repeated the information in a voice too, even to argue with. Bryn tried irregular cycles, then wrong counting, then a look at Grant that asked him to rescue math with charm. He had been out of state during the window that mattered, smiling through a donor retreat with Celeste beside him. Willa took the phone from my hand, and I sat on the floor between boxes, realizing I did not have to call anyone for the truth to arrive. The fallout did not arrive like thunder. It arrived through canceled lunches, short emails, and women who had once kissed Celeste Whitcomb on both cheeks, suddenly remembering appointments across town. A board member who used to praise Grant's vision asked why Bryn Caldwell's communications fees were sitting inside a scholarship program report with no work attached. By then, The clinic story had already moved through the same polite rooms that once pretended not to see me. Grant called before sunset, then again after dinner, then from a number I did not know. I let each call die because Elise Danner had warned me that frightened men look for sentences they can bend. Celeste left one voicemail, her voice smooth enough to serve at a luncheon, saying, "Lena, private matters should stay inside the family." I listened once, deleted nothing, and sent the recording to Elise because Celeste had finally named the place that had never protected me. The next morning, the Attorney General's Charitable Oversight Office requested records from the program, and Grant's voice stopped sounding polished. He left a message claiming I had abandoned him during a misunderstanding, as if a false pregnancy timeline and missing deliverables could be softened by tone. When he finally reached me through Elise's line, the first thing through the receiver was not apology, but panic. "Do you know what this will do to me?" And I answered before my hands could shake. "No, Grant. But it is no longer my job to repair what you chose." After that, the calls became fewer and the emails became more careful. The same people who once praised Grant's charm now asked for copies, dates, approvals, and explanations in writing. Bryn lost 2 event contracts before the week ended. Not because I said her name publicly, but because her name was already printed on invoices nobody could justify. One donor who had hugged her at the luncheon asked the board whether her campaign work had ever produced a final report, and nobody answered quickly enough. Celeste tried to call it a family embarrassment, but families do not issue document requests. And by then the room had run out of polite words. The board did not ask me to cry, which was the first decent thing that room had ever done for me. I joined the meeting from Willa Stanton's kitchen table in Burlington, with Elise Danner beside the screen on a separate call and a glass of water I never touched. Grant appeared in a conference room in Providence, pale under the lights, while Celeste Whitcomb sat 2 seats away with her pearls on like they still meant authority. The board chair opened with one sentence about cooperating with the Attorney General's request, and nobody used the word misunderstanding. They asked me about process first, not marriage, and that steadied me more than kindness would have. I explained how vendor contracts were approved, how event lodging was documented, and why Bryn Caldwell's invoices did not match any completed campaign work. When a board member asked whether I had flagged the charges before, I gave the dates, the email subject lines, and Grant's replies requesting that I hold them until after the luncheon. Grant leaned toward the microphone and tried. Lena always handled details aggressively, but the chair only looked down at the packet and asked him which detail was inaccurate. Celeste moved next, smooth enough to sound wounded. "My son made personal mistakes, but this institution should not confuse private pain with public harm," she offered. And for a second I saw the room she had spent years building around that sentence. Then another board member lifted the referral letter Celeste had written for Bryn and asked why a paid vendor was being introduced to donors as Grant's strategic partner before her work had been reviewed. Celeste blinked once, then looked at Grant, and that tiny movement said more than any confession she would never give. I did not call Bryn names or tell them about the clinic, because the documents already had enough weight. I said the campaign draft contained language copied from a scholarship appeal I had written. The hotel dates matched no approved program, and the final reports attached to Bryn's invoices were missing. Elise had told me to answer only what was asked, so I did. Grant stared at the screen as if my calm was a trick, but it was not calm that beat him. It was paper, dates, signatures, and the slow humiliation of a room realizing the woman they had placed 2 tables away had been the only one keeping the program honest. Providence did not turn on Grant Whitcomb in one dramatic afternoon. It simply stopped making room for him, one canceled lunch and unanswered invitation at a time. The first board notice came through Elise Danner, saying Grant had been placed on leave while the program cooperated with the Attorney General's Charitable Oversight Office. The second came from a donor I had seated beside Celeste, who wrote, I am sorry I did not ask better questions. Bryn Caldwell lost her contracts before anyone made a public speech about her. 2 nonprofits removed her from campaigns, and 1 gala replaced her name with a firm from Newport. The clinic story had done what gossip does in polite rooms, but the invoices gave people permission to act concerned about ethics instead of embarrassment. I did not correct them, because the result was the same, and for once their manners worked against someone other than me. Celeste withdrew from the Scholarship Council after the board asked why her referral letter had placed Bryn in front of donors before vendor work had been reviewed. Her resignation note used words like transition, privacy, and family strain, but no one I knew repeated them with a straight face. The women who used to save her a chair at fundraisers began letting those chairs fill naturally. Providence did not exile her loudly. It just stopped reaching back when she entered a room. Grant was gone from the program by the end of the review, with repayment terms handled through attorneys and every future employer left to read between the lines of his exit. He called me once through Elise, asking whether I felt proud, and I remember looking at Willa's kitchen table, where my new life was stacked in mail, coffee, and rental forms. No, I answered, before Elise ended the call. I feel done. In Burlington, done became its own kind of beginning. I accepted a position helping a women's education nonprofit rebuild its intake process, then started taking consulting work for small programs that needed cleaner records and fewer charming men near their budgets. Willa took me shopping for a used dining table, and when she said, "You do not have to make this place perfect," I ran my hand over the scratched wood and answered, "I just want one table where nobody lies to me." For a long time after Providence stopped calling, I expected my body to keep waiting for the next correction. I would hear a formal voice on the phone, or see a cream envelope in the mail, and some old part of me would brace for Grant Whitcomb to turn my piece into another room where I had to defend myself. Then ordinary days began stacking up higher than fear. I locked my office at the women's education nonprofit, bought groceries without checking whether anyone preferred something else, and learned that quiet could be a place instead of a punishment. Grant wrote once through Elise Danner. Months after the review ended and his name had disappeared from the program website, his message was careful, full of words like regret, pressure, and damage. But the sentence underneath all of it was still the same old sentence, asking me to make him feel less alone with what he had done. Elise read it to me over the phone and waited. I looked at the used dining table Willa Stanton had helped me carry up 3 flights of stairs, the one with scratches across the corner and no history of lies around it. And I answered, "Tell him I wish him clarity, but I am not available for his recovery." By then, Bryn Caldwell was no longer attached to any gala invitation I heard about, and Celeste Whitcomb had become a name people lowered instead of lifted. None of that felt like fireworks. It felt like mail forwarding, clean sheets, a steady paycheck, and the first winter morning when I woke up in Burlington without wondering what Grant had told someone about me. Later, I met Owen Radley at a small bookstore workshop Willa dragged me to, and he did not ask for my whole story before offering me a chair by the window. He only asked if I liked coffee plain, and somehow that small question felt more respectful than every polished toast Grant had ever made in public. The people in that Boston clinic thought they were watching Grant's future begin, but they were really sitting inside the last version of a life I had already left. I was in Vermont with boxes on the floor, a dead marriage behind me, and a name that finally sounded like mine again. Thank you for staying with this story to the end. If any piece of Lena's life felt familiar, leave your thoughts below. And if you want more stories about women finding peace after being underestimated, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.